want to talk about total commitment. And I don't intend to start off with that old tired joke about the chicken and the pig. So, y'all are all supposed to know that joke, so let's see a little smile. And you don't know it? Where the chicken and the pig were arguing and about which one was the greatest contributor to breakfast. And the pig said, well, you know, it's pretty easy for you. You have to just sacrifice an egg, but for me it's total commitment to provide that bacon. See, I didn't tell you, I warned you about that. It's an old joke. But I want to talk about total commitment, and I'd rather start it by looking at Acts 26. In verse 24, as he continued to make his defense, Festus shouted, "You're out of your mind, Paul. Too much education is driving you crazy." But Paul said, "I'm not out of my mind, Your Excellency Festus. I'm uttering words of sober truth. Indeed, the king knows about these things, and I can speak to him freely, for I'm certain that none of these things has escaped his notice, since this wasn't done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe them." Agrippa said to Paul, "Can you so quickly persuade me to become a Christian?" Paul replied, "Whether quickly or not, I wish to God that not only you, but everyone listening to me today would become what I am, except for these chains." So many people are unwilling to make that total commitment to Christianity. We want to commit a little bit, a little of our time, a little of our money, a little of our devotion. But you know, in Joshua, the 24th chapter, in verse 13, we read a fairly simple statement. He says, "I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." A simple notion of commitment where he says, choose, make a choice. And he says, my family is going to serve Jehovah. My family is going to serve the Lord. Some of you here tonight need to make the choice. Oh, you think you're kind of harboring it in your back of your mind, and eventually you will. But he says you're not to have any other gods. The god of mammon, money, power, time, things, Bacchus, pleasure, Mars. We're going to fight. Be aggressive. Or the god of Eros, unbridled sexual activity. He says you can't have any other gods before me. What is it you're holding on to? Is it your career? Is it your money? Is it your pleasures? The Lord said, choose you. It's time to choose this day whom you'll serve. I'd like for you to look at the example of Moses. And if you hadn't studied this, and you should have studied it, all of you kids should have studied it in Bible class. Have you studied about Moses leaving Egypt when he was arguing with Pharaoh? Have you studied about that? Well, you remember what he said? Pharaoh said, well, you go, but you leave your animals, your flocks, and your herds here. You go worship your God for a while and come back. because he knew that if they left their families, first of all, he said, you men go. And they'd want to leave their families. Then he said, well, y'all go, but leave your flocks and your herds, because he knew that if they left their money there, it would not necessarily draw them back. But Moses said to him, our livestock also must go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind. For we must take of them to serve the Lord our God, and we do not know with what we must serve the Lord until we arrive there. Now, what is it you're holding out on? What is it you're holding back so that you stay chained really to the world? Is it your money, your house, your car, your job, your family that are all tacked back there in your past, and you just can't let go of them? Moses said, not a hoof shall be left behind. Not 1 foot of an animal is going to stay here. We're taking them all. He says we're taking our children. You know, I've seen a lot of Christians who their children become unfaithful, and they just have to follow those children. Is it your possessions? All of that money you've got, is that something you just can't give up? You know, I want you to look in Mark 12 in verse 41. He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums. And a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. I don't know what folks are like these days, but I do remember times. Before I moved here, I worshiped at a congregation down in the Cincinnati area. And they had built what today is kind of a little pitiful building, but they built it with their own money. What they did, many of those men would go out and mortgage their homes, their small homes, and take the excess money and take it down and put it together in order to build a church. You know, when you make a commitment, it's not just a quarter or $1 or $10 a week that most of us, you know, it used to be when I was a kid, my mom or dad, when I was little, would give me a nickel or something to put in the collection. Nowadays, the kids think that it doesn't count unless you give them $1 or a $5 bill to put in. Inflation, I suppose, even in our children's eyes. But every one of us is able to give them a $1 bill or a $5 bill. My folks couldn't have given me more than a nickel or two when I was a child, and I thought that was a lot. But these men mortgaged their homes in order to build the church. Now, when this congregation was built, there was tremendous sacrifice from a number of different people in order to get it built. And I remember, Rick, do you remember meeting in the building when it was just a basement? And everybody walked down in the basement. They had it, I guess the basement sort of roofed over, covered up to worship. It takes courage and total commitment to build a church, to build a building. And if we're going to succeed here as a church, It's going to take that sort of commitment. We're not just here to entertain you. We're not here to just give you a little pickup once or twice a week so that you can be encouraged or maybe discouraged a little bit from your sins. In order for this church to exist, there has to be a real, total commitment. This has to mean everything. Now, yes, we don't need that kind of terrible financial sacrifice on your part. But you know, when Moses said, not a hoof shall be left behind, we may need them all. We don't know what God's going to require. We're going to take them all and be ready to give. You know, when you became a Christian, that should have been your attitude. I don't know what he's going to require. I don't know what's going to be necessary, but I'm willing to give it all. This woman, this poor woman, gave all that she had, and the Lord praised her. You might notice Luke 9 and verse 59. To another he said, follow me. But he said, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. Now, I don't know exactly that. You know, that seems terrible, the very idea. Well, I'm not sure his father was dead. So perhaps what he was saying to the Lord is, Lord, I'll follow you after my father dies, and I get him buried and get all that taken care of, and then I'll be ready to follow you. I'm going to tell you a story. My aunt, who just recently died, dated a fella, a Jewish man, for, I don't know, 50 years. And he told her that whole time, and she told the whole family, that as soon as her mother died, he was going to marry her. Now, right away, anybody with any sense would have said, well, forget you if your mom's more important than me, but not my aunt. She waited, mom died. Where's the ring? Well, when my sister dies, then I'll marry you. And so they went on. What was the problem? He wasn't making any sort of total commitment to that marriage at all. He was just sort of stringing her along. There's a lot of Christians who think they can string the Lord along. Not a hoof shall be left behind. Look here, let's read the rest of Luke 9. Jesus said to him, leave the dead to bury their own dead. As for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. Another said, I will follow you, Lord, but let me first say farewell to those at my home. Jesus said to him, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. Let me go bury my father, he said the first time. And then the second one said, well, let me say goodbye to my family. Are you so attached to your family that you can't let go of them? Are they holding you back from being a Christian? You know, we've all got family members who aren't Christians. We all do. Some more than others. Some of them who are offended by the fact that you might think about being a Christian. Offended because it means less to them. You're not following them to hell. You're following the Lord. And they're offended by that because they think they're number one. Are you willing to put the Lord first and say, I don't care about the pull of my family. I'm going to make a total commitment to the Lord. Think with me again about the Apostle Paul. We just read here in Philippians 3. I'm going to read to you from the English Standard, this passage we read. Though I myself have reason for confidence in the flesh also, if anyone else thinks he has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee. He had his career planned out, what he was going to do and be. As to zeal, a persecutor of the church. As to righteousness, under the law, blameless. Whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. How about you? Are you willing to give up that career you had planned out? That life you had, that religion you had that seemed so clear to you? For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ. They cleaned that up. The word is done. And be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through the faith of Christ, the righteousness from God that depends on faith. Are you willing to make that sort of commitment? Totally committed? In 2 Timothy 4, verses 6 through 8, I am already being poured out as a drink offering, a sacrifice. And the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. You willing to make that total commitment? You know, I had a good friend before I got married. I had a good friend, an older lady. Her name, what was her name? Anyway, I called her Snuffy Smith. Her first name wasn't Snuffy. Her last name was Smith. But I lived on the third floor of an old house. She lived on the second floor, and we got along real well. But I came down one day from my loft, and she was disgustingly happy and slurring some of her words. And I said, "You are drunk." And I said, "Where is it?" And so she showed me a bottle of wine, and I ran into her kitchen, uncorked that thing, and poured it down the sink with her hollering behind me. She either hid it well the rest of the time that we knew one another, or she quit drinking. I'll give you another example. Can I use Elizabeth? Sure, I can use Elizabeth. Yeah, my wife's going to say no. Yeah, just give up. Elizabeth's father-in-law, who is a Catholic and who has been known to drink occasionally, back when they were first married, came home visiting the family, and lo and behold, Liz looked in her refrigerator, and there was a big 6-pack of beer. And Liz, nobody else in the family drank beer, so she knew that was from him, and it was awfully presumptuous of him to stick that in her refrigerator and think he was going to drink that in her house. She immediately took that. She wasn't as good as me. She didn't pour it down the drain, which I would have done. But she ran out, she got it and ran out and took it outside and set it by a tree. And I think somebody told him later where his beer was. It was out there by the tree, and if he was going to drink it, he could good and well go out there and drink it. What sort of commitment you got? You going to let people sin in your house? In your life? Are you going to speak to them? What sort of commitment do you have? Are you just going to go along with their sin and their error? Paul said, I've counted all things but loss. I'm willing to give up family. I'm willing to give up career path. I'm willing to give up my religion, everything to follow Christ. What about you? What about you? You're going to put up with it from your family, from your boss, from your friends? We've had folks here before who said, hey, I can't keep the job I've got. It's a great job, but the boss expects me to go out with a bunch of other managers to a drinking party all the time, and I'm not going. And it's going to put him on the outs with me because I'm not partying with him. Okay, I'll get another job, somebody that doesn't think that drinking's a part of the job. What about you? You willing to say that? You know, your friends in school, they're going to do things. You willing to say, I don't do that? And if you're going to get mad and upset with me, we need to part company. I've given up all things for Christ. I'm already poured out as a drink offering. The time of my departure has come. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who loved his appearing. You willing to make that sort of commitment? It's important. He says, I have fought the good fight. I've kept the faith. And I've finished the race. A lot of Christians hadn't fought much, they hadn't kept much, and they didn't finish well. What about you? You willing to make that sort of commitment? Let's look at Cornelius for just a minute. You've studied about him before in Acts 10, where Cornelius makes this statement when Peter comes into his house. He tells him the angel told him to send for him, and he's done that. He says, so I sent for you at once. Didn't wait. At once. And you have been kind enough to come. Now, therefore, we are all here in the presence of God to hear all that you have been commanded by the Lord. He said, we're here to hear all things commanded of God. You know, a lot of Christians don't want to hear all things, just a few things. Things that don't bother their conscience. The things that don't afflict their life. Those they don't want to emphasize very much. And he says, we're all here. All of us came. He gathered together his kinsmen and near friends, and he wanted everybody to hear what he wanted to hear, what he knew was going to come from God. What about you? Have you made that commitment yet? We're here to hear all things. We're here, everybody I can get to come. You know, my grandson Joe, Joe's a crazy fisherman. I see this fella out fly fishing in the middle of winter. Look at that snow on the ground. Well, my crazy grandson came down Thanksgiving. You remember what the temperature was? It's about 33, 34. And if that kid didn't spend the whole day out fishing, I was working in my office, trying to stay out of the way and out of any obligation at the house until dinner time. And had a fire going. He'd come running in about every 15 minutes with his hands nearly frostbit and say, I got to come in and warm up just a little bit, Grandpa. He'd stay in about 15 minutes and then he'd go back out. Now there's a dedicated fisherman. And then he fussed at his brother to come out and take pictures of the bass he caught. He caught it, which amazed me. But he's dedicated to it. What about you? You know, it's a miserable day. It's going to be a miserable winter. It always is. You going to be here to worship? Or is it going to be easy to stay home and say, oh, man, it's got a little snow on the ground. It's raining. It's cold as kraut. I just stay home. What kind of commitment do you have? And you know, sometimes your family is going to come to visit. And not all of them are Christians and they don't go to church. And you're going to say, well, it's icky and it'll just be that old same guy preaching. And I've heard all those songs before. And it is icky outside this winter. I believe I'll stay home, visit with the family. I don't get to see them very much. You don't really have much commitment, do you? You've put your family first. You put the Lord last. And you say, well, I only did that once or twice. How many times did it take to put him last? You don't have the commitment you need to have. Finally, I may need to blow this up a little bit so I can read this poem or this story. This is from W.H. Murray, the story of Everest, climbing Mount Everest. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. that the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur that would never have otherwise occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, rising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance which no man could have dreamt about would come his way. I have learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Are you willing to commit? To make that total commitment. Not hesitance, not holding back, but a total commitment. To renounce everything. In Luke 14, I'm going to start reading about verse 26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he have enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other's yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. The simple concept of making a total commitment, that's what the Lord requires. Hesitancy will ruin you. But once you make that commitment, it will all begin to fall into place. Your life pattern will have been laid out, and you'll be ready for the future. In Matthew 22, the last passage today, teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. What about you tonight? Are you willing to make that commitment? Not just a part, not just a little, but everything you have and are. Come while we stand and sing.
.428. Oh, happy they that fix my choice on thee, my Savior.